Today I want to touch upon, as briefly as possible, the topic of imposter syndrome, which is something I mentioned a while ago, but I want to talk about imposter syndrome for a particular reason today, and that is to illustrate the principle of the inversion. The inversion is the most important psychological principle there is, so it could be said. And yet we never ever hear about it, so that's interesting right from the onset. So here we have this thing that is definitely, at the very least, an extremely important psychological concept or principle, and we have absolutely no mention of it. So even if it wasn't the number one most important, it's definitely up there in the top 5, top 4, top 3. I don't know what the other ones are, actually. I'm sure there's a few of them. There might be. There might not be. So what's going on? Assuming that what I'm saying has got some kind of validity at all, we'll assume that, because if we don't assume it, that's the end. I won't get any further, really, unless we assume that there is some validity in this line of discussion or line of reasoning. Then we won't carry on with it. We'll just walk away and we'll think, well, there's no validity in it, so I won't continue with it. So we'll assume that there is, just for the sake of the journey. This isn't to say that the inversion as a principle isn't mentioned anywhere. I know that it's mentioned in one of the Mahayana sutras, probably more than one, but I haven't read that many of them. And there it's not spoken of as an inversion, but more of a fundamental transformation of the way we see things, and it's referred to as a turning around in the deepest seat of our being. So normally, here I am in the seat of my being, I'm looking that way. And it's possible, well, more than possible, it's part of it is the awakening process, whereby I see things completely opposite to the way I normally see things. And that's the turning around in the seat of my being. So things that before I would have thought were okay or great or fine now fill me with horror, and things which would have been, I would either have been completely unaware of or completely terrified of, I now realize to be the one and only true reality. And this is, we can also relate this to Plato's parable of the cave, even though it doesn't fit quite so well. And we can, fits pretty well though, we can say that the inversion is when we come out of the cave where we mistook shadows for light, or we mistook illusions for reality, and we come out into the open fields where the sun's shining and the birds are singing and there's trees and stuff. And then we realize, wow, this is it. Those shadows were just shadows. Those illusions were just illusions. What a way of life I had then. And that is a reversal too. It's mentioned in the Tibetan Book of the Dead in at least one place. And it is said that after we die, the world shall be in revolution. Obviously, that doesn't mean kind of Marxist revolution or anything like that. It just means that the very nature of reality is in revolution to how it always has been when we were alive, or rather how we always thought it was when we were alive, which is unsettling, to put it mildly. I don't know what the best way is to explain what is meant by this term in revolution without actually going into it, reading page after page with the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which would be good, but I haven't got time for that. But to me, it's kind of like normally we experience the world as being dead and inanimate and passive, just a thing, and the life resides inside me. The awareness resides inside me, looking out at that world, which is, as I've just said, dead. It's just a thing, like a bunch of rocks, a bit of soil, and that's basically it, and a bit of water. That's the earth. So then, in revolution means that I realize the only dark spot, the only lack of life, the only lack of awareness is in me, and consciousness is everywhere else. Everything is consciousness. Everything is awareness. Everything is alive, apart from me. Now, I don't know if that's quite is something that is quite right, or whether the relevant scholars would agree with me on that. But as an actual principle, that's kind of what it is, I'd say. Got it? Exactly the wrong way round. Someone I know, well, kind of a correspondent of mine, kind of like a friend or a correspondent, expressed something similar, saying that the universe is intelligent, but we're not. We're as thick as be damned. But that doesn't matter because the universe is intelligent, and that's more important. If we hand over to the universe a bit more, then the universe's intelligence will help us. If we think we know best, then that's the path of error, because we're not intelligent. All the intelligence resides in the universe, not in us. We are kind of, according to this way of thinking about things, and obviously you don't have to agree with this, that we kind of like the absence of awareness. So somehow we're orientated around the absence of awareness, a little black spot, a little blind spot. But the whole universe is aware. That's if you go along with this way of looking at things, which I will go along with it just for the sake of the discussion. I'll go along with it anyway, even if there isn't a discussion, I think, just because it's more interesting. It has far greater possibilities for transformation than assuming that we're intelligent and the universe isn't. That has no possibilities in it at all, really. No radical surprises. But if you're in the market for radical surprises, and obviously we're not always in the market for radical surprises, the most radical surprise of all is to discover that the universe is conscious and that we are not. Even though we're a part of the universe, we can become conscious when we stop being this oppositional ego construct, or when we stop identifying with this oppositional ego construct, which is a dead mechanical bundle of reflexes with no sense, no intelligence, no awareness, whatever you want to call it. So that's the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the last example I'll give is Carl Jung, who talks about the watery realm of unconsciousness, which we can visit in our dreams, and we can visit at other times as well, maybe in visions or some other way. And so when we're in the watery realm of unconsciousness, of what Jung calls unconsciousness, which is different from the type of meaning that I was using the word, in which I was using the word earlier. For Jung, unconsciousness means that consciousness, that what lies beyond the personal ego, the personal way of seeing things. Anyway, what Jung says is that normally we get to feel that we're the object and everything else is the subject. So when I look at something, I come up closer to it, and I look at it, I'm looking at it. I'm the subject, it is the object. I am looking at it. It's passive, I am the looker. So in the watery realm of unconsciousness, says Jung, when we do that, we find that what we're looking at is looking at us. So it's the subject. In the watery realm of unconsciousness, everything is the subject, and there is no object. Object meaning a kind of a thing. Now, an object is a thing that I myself have thingified or reified by making it into an object. It's become secondary, subsidiary to me. It's just a thing I'm looking at. So we do this with the universe the whole time, and other people, of course. We turn other people into things the whole time. It's just handier that way, isn't it? Hey, a thing, how you doing? Oh, never mind that thing over there. He always says that. And I don't mean thing in a kind way. I mean in stripping every little last bit of recognition or acknowledgement that they're a person too, kind of a way. So the way the rational mind works, conceptual mind, is that it objectifies everything, thingifies everything, conceptualizes everything naturally enough. It could hardly do otherwise, really. And so when we do this, we turn the universe into a thing, which is necessary for this operation of cogitation, the operation of cogitation. But it isn't really like that. So the principle of inversion means that when we cop on, we realize that everything is object, and that I might perceive everything as subject, and I might perceive myself to be the object of that subject. I'm getting confused with my subjects and objects, which is a weird turnaround. I'm now the thing, and what I'm studying is studying me, which is a weird experience, but it is an experience a lot of people could tell you about, if they've had it, of course. So it's like having the rug pulled from under one, the carpet pulled away. And it's like, what the hell's going on? And ultimately, there is no object, there is only subject. There is only consciousness, there are no objects of which consciousness is conscious, which are themselves not conscious or not consciousness. And it just occurred to me, one final little example of this type of thing is, and it's too nice a one to leave out, is when Alice goes down the rabbit hole, when she falls down the rabbit hole, or when she goes through the looking glass, not to forget about that, everything is changed. And obviously when you go through a looking glass and you're into a looking glass world, everything is reversed. Obviously that's how it goes. And the rules that govern that form of existence are completely opposite to the rules which govern the type of existence that we're used to. So it takes an awful lot of adapting to, because the thing about basic rules of existence is that we never question them, we just assume they are always there. So when they're suddenly switched over to be their inverse, we have an awful hard time getting our heads around that. In fact, that's probably not a very good way of putting it, because we can't get our heads around it, but we have a very hard time with it anyway, because we've got nothing to orientate ourselves with in the way which we normally orientate. And the same, of course, is true when Alice falls down the rabbit hole. It's a very different world indeed. The world has been turned on its head. It's completely different. You have to start off learning all about it. You can't bring what we thought we knew from the old world. And this is passed into the vocabulary, really. When people talk about things being a rabbit hole, that's exactly what they mean. So when people talk about going down the rabbit hole, they're talking about radical surprise. They're talking about the world turning out to be 180 degrees different from what we ever thought it was. They're talking about the principle of inversion. So we do know about the principle of inversion, even though it doesn't get mentioned particularly in psychology or in any technical fields. So anyway, the purpose of me going on about this is I was originally saying that I was going to talk about imposter syndrome as a way of illustrating inversion. So after the long introduction, to quickly come to imposter syndrome, and we all know what imposter syndrome is. So like I remember having it when I was at college in a place called Osterley in West London, and I was studying occupational therapy. I was constantly aware that I wasn't like everyone else. I could be found out any minute and exposed for being an imposter. It's kind of like when you're a social insect and you've gone to the wrong hive or you've gone to the wrong place, termite mound. And that as soon as all the other bees or insects of whatever type find out that you're not one of them, they'll jump on you and sting you to death immediately. That's what it's like with the social insects. It's also like what it's like with humans, because humans are social insects too. We don't see ourselves as such. We're termites. We're just like termites. We build termite mounds. We don't like anyone who hasn't got the same protein identification coding as us. We don't like them at all. Ideally, we'd like to sting them to death, but civilization stops us maybe doing that, but we still marginalize people who are different from us because we're still termites for the most part. So we all understand what imposter syndrome is, and I imagine that the conventional approach to someone, if you're a therapist and they were talking about how they have this terrible imposter syndrome, which they can never feel that they fit in, truly, even though they might kind of can pass themselves off under ideal circumstances, it's still hard work and you don't feel comfortable about it. You're always aware that you're having to camouflage yourself. So what would you say to someone if you're in a conventional setting? You would say, well, no, you do belong. It's just all in your head. I don't know if they'd say that. People might say something a bit more sophisticated than that, but it would come down to it. That's an aberration. That's an error. Of course you belong. Things like that which make sense and kind of make us feel good in a way, but it's not true though. The whole thing about imposter syndrome is it's not an aberration or delusion. It's a little bit of reality creeping in. Because in this game that we're all playing, and it doesn't matter whether it's the game of being someone who's studying to be an occupational therapist or the game to be studying anything, maybe medicine, but you're a student doctor and you're studying medicine, you think you're an imposter, whatever it is, or whether you're just in a social imposter generally and you kind of say the right things to fit in with people, but you're not really fitting in, you don't really feel that you belong. So very often it can be to do with the human overall group of society that we feel like an imposter. But the fact is, we are imposters. It's just that we know it and everyone else doesn't know it. The other guys think they're not imposters. It's kind of weird, isn't it? They're unconscious, in other words, in the psychological sense of the word, which means that they're able to play a game and not know that they're playing it. So when we know that we're playing a game, it kind of spoils the game because we realize it's a deliberate artifice on our part. It's a deliberate thing. We have to keep it up, keep up the pretense, keep up the role. It's like an actor, remembering that they're in the role of Macbeth or whoever it is. I imagine to be an actor, you have to, you can't forget that you're in role and suddenly think you're just yourself, I imagine. So you're an imposter there, necessarily so. But in order to be part of any consensus reality, any group reality, any group, we have to play the game of looking at the world the same way as everyone else does. We have to play the game. And because we're playing a game, it's not really who we are, it's not really what we think, it's not really etc., etc. That's all belonging to the role that I'm playing. So to say that I'm playing a role in a game is pretty much the same as saying I'm an imposter. We're all imposters because we're always all pretending, even though we don't know we're pretending, to be somebody in this game within the terms of the game. So within society, if it were to be the case that I am 100% adapted to the social group that I'm in, to the social world, the culture, I don't feel that I'm an imposter. I feel that I'm authentic as hell. I don't even think about it because you only stop worrying, am I an imposter or not, when we feel that we are, but that doesn't happen otherwise. It never occurs to us. So that's unconsciousness. That's playing a game without knowing you're playing a game. Now, it could happen to any of us that you suddenly realise that this isn't really me, you know. It's just an act I'm putting on. And when that awareness comes, we'd have imposter syndrome, which is pathologized by the group. In short, I'm going to try and be brief about this like I said I would, which is pathologized. It's seen as mental ill health. Maybe not the worst form of mental ill health, but a form of mental ill health all the same. And treated, corrected if possible. Or if not possible, still just acknowledged as mental ill health, i.e. not a valid thing, not a real thing. It's an aberration. But in reality, everything's back to front. Everyone else is an imposter just as I'm an imposter, but I know it, or have an inkling, kind of inkling that it is. This isn't really who I am. This isn't my beautiful wife, this isn't my beautiful house, etc., etc. As in the Talking Heads song. Now it's more comfortable to stay in the unconscious state where I think, this is my beautiful wife. Of course she is. This is my beautiful house. It's mine. Of course it is. You try taking it away from me, I'll get the police on you. This is all mine. That's unconsciousness. Because I don't feel like an imposter in it. I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. But it isn't mine. It's just belonging to the act. It's not me at all. What am I doing here? And that moment of wondering what I'm doing here happens further on, I suppose. To start off with, when we get imposter syndrome, we think it's because we're an imposter, and so we're struggling to kind of cope with that. But if we stick with it and we get to a point where we no longer see ourselves as an imposter, but we realize that we genuinely aren't this person, which is no longer seen as a negative thing so much. It is negative because I can't fit in and everyone else is going to sting me to death, maybe, but or at least not be friends with me, not talk to me. But then the inversion, if I can try my hardest to get to the point, the inversion in all this is that what we call mental ill health is actually mental health. And that goes for a lot more things than just imposter syndrome.